All right, I think we can get started. I'm seeing that we have a good number of people on the webinar here. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Once again, we are kicking off our spring series with NCARB in partnership with the AIAS. This one specifically focusing on international students. Once again, if you need it, you can enable closed captions and set your caption language using the CC button at the bottom of your screen. We're going to get started. Hello, everyone, once again. My name is Gilberto Lozada Baez. I'm the Vice President of the AIAS, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar on the licensure process and NCARB. I'm joined today by three expert panelists, Neshe, Graciela, and Patricia, who are going to answer your questions about licensure in the US as international students. We'll start out with a 15-minute presentation giving an overview of the licensure process and options for international applicants. The rest of the time will be available for any and all questions for our panelists to answer live. Before we get started, I would like to ask our panelists to briefly introduce themselves. Neshe, let's start with you.
Thank you, Gilberto. Hello, everyone. Hope you're staying warm and cozy. I'm Neshe, which means joy in Turkish. I'm from Turkey, born and raised there, and came to Chicago for college. Went to IIT, Illinois Institute of Technology, and received my bachelor's in architecture, which is a 5-year accredited, NAB accredited professional degree. And at my time during my architectural education, I got involved with AIAS, AIA, and NOMA, and started my licensure journey when I was back in school, thanks to the NOMA Foundation Fellowship, which helped me get into the gears of starting my NCARB record and documenting my EXP hours, which we'll probably get a little more information on once the presentation starts. And I've been working as an architectural designer, enrolled architects and engineers for a year and a half now. Excited to be here and have some meaningful conversations with you today.
Perfect. Thank you, Neshe. Graciela, do you want to go next?
Yes, sure. Thank you so much, Gilberto. And hi, everyone. My name is Graciela Carrillo. I am originally from Bogota, Colombia. I came to this country with a work visa H-1B. I've been in the US for 20 years. I am a licensed architect in New York State, and I currently work as a senior manager at NASO BOCES, which is an educational agency funded by the state of New York in Long Island. And I'm also the co-founder and vice president of the Immigrant Architects Coalition. This is a group that helps and creates a network for immigrant architects in this country. And I'm also at the AIA Board of Directors National. Starting this year, for the next 3 years, I will be a director at large there. Previously, I was involved with AIA too at different levels, state and also local levels. And I'm very happy to be here. I hope we can respond to all the questions that you all have. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Graciela. And last but not least, Patricia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Patricia Romalo. My role at NCARB is Assistant Vice President of International Relations. So I have the pleasure of working with international individuals and supporting their path to licensure in the US and US architects going out as well. Personally, I was born in Argentina. That's where the accent comes from. And then I studied architecture there, got my license, and decided to do it all over again and came to the US. And now I'm licensed in a couple of states. So it's a real pleasure to be here, and I hope we answer most of your questions.
Great. Thank you all. Next up, we're going to be moving to the presentation portion of today's webinar. Remember that you can submit questions about any content that you see or any question that you may have using the Q&A tool throughout the entire webinar. And if you have to step out at any point, remember that a recording of this webinar will be available on YouTube. So, Patricia, I'll hand it over to you for the presentation.
Thank you very much. Let me get the presentation started. There. So let's talk about licensure in the US. Starting with the very basic, it's slightly different than licensure in many of our other countries in the world. We do not have a national license. Instead, we have 55 jurisdictions, and that in NCARB world means 55 states and territories that have licensing boards and issue licenses to practice architecture in their own jurisdiction, which is another particularity. This means that you may end up with multiple licenses. The license is not tied to where you're sitting. Instead, it is tied to where your projects are. So, for instance, I said I'm licensed in Kentucky and New Jersey. If I have a client who wants to have a building in Texas, I cannot just go and provide services. I have to do the process of getting a license in Texas as well to be able to practice there. And this also ties to the title regulations. So in the United States, calling yourself an architect, it's regulated, so using the title of architect, and you can only call yourself an architect and render services in those jurisdictions where you're licensed. And that with each jurisdiction, the 55 jurisdictions, having the right to set their own requirements for licensure, NCARB comes in as the representative of the 55 jurisdictions. They are our members. So NCARB is a nonprofit organization that has 55 members, the licensing boards. And of course, we have customers, all of you, who are in the process of getting licensed or already licensed. The role of NCARB is to collaborate with the licensing boards and develop the programs that you have to go through to become an architect. And we'll talk about those programs today. To get a license, you need 3 core components. You need to develop and prove your competency prove your competency to be able to practice architecture individually, and because ultimately, as an architect, you are responsible. If you complete the 3 components, education, experience, and examination, and meet the requirements of the specific licensing board where you're seeking licensure, you are eligible to get a license in that jurisdiction. And once you have at least 1 license in a US jurisdiction, you are eligible to obtain an NCARB certificate. An NCARB certificate, it's a recommendation. It's NCARB certifying that you have completed all 3 components to licensure, and you're recommended for reciprocity since you have already proven your competencies. And of course, this is important when you start having projects in different states and you're already licensed in one and you need to get a license in the other new place where you're trying to get to work. So the path that most people take to become licensed, it's the one I'm going to present right now, but there are multiple pathways. Let's look at those. The typical path, it's obtaining a degree from a NAB accredited program, documenting your experience, and taking and passing the architect registration examination. The examination can be accessed, or you can start testing after you complete the education requirement. In this case, it would be the NAB accredited program in most jurisdictions. There's a handful where this is an exception and you can test anytime, but in most jurisdictions, you have to wait until you have documented and you have completed your education. The AXP, which is the framework you use to document your experience, can be started anytime after high school, of course, within the rules of the program that we will cover in a minute. Once you have completed the 3 components, you are able to obtain a license as long as you meet the additional requirements as well. And once you have that license, you're able to get the NCARB certificate. But there are other ways. And if you're here in international webinar, you might need to hear this, or maybe so you can guide others. If you have an education that it's outside the US and do not have a NAB accredited degree, you can have your education, the international education, evaluated by NAB. NAB, it's I forgot to mention before, it's the National Architectural Accrediting Board. And what they do is develop the criteria and assess the programs, the architecture programs for accreditation. So in this case, if you have international education and no NAB, you can have your education evaluated. NAB compares your education to the NCARB education standards, which are based on NAB's criteria. And they will tell you if they are equivalent, you're good, but there might be some deficiencies. And I'm going to just give an example. In most cases, of course, this can vary, but if your school was not teaching in English, you would likely get one of the deficiencies as being English. And you will work with NAB to identify how to satisfy that deficiency. It could be an exam, it could be a course. There are many ways, and of course, depending on the deficiency. And once you have completed that course, exam, whatever you need to do, you will have your report updated by NAB. And when NCARB receives the updated report, you are determined as having satisfied the education requirement, and you can start testing with the ARE. Education, of course, experience, of course, still has to be completed, documented, but that can be done throughout school or while you're taking your exams. Once the three components, once again, if you are done, if you have satisfied it, you can obtain a license in this jurisdiction where you're seeking licensure and be eligible for an NCARB certificate. On the other hand, if instead of having or only having your education, international education, you also have a license to practice outside the United States, that license has to be active and in good standing. It has to be for unlimited practice. That is because some countries have limitations regarding building height, square footage, building type. So it has to be equivalent to ours, unlimited. And the authority that issued the license has to have a way of tracking disciplinary sanctions. If those requirements are met, you can have your education verified, and you can, so you send NCARB your education documentation. In this case, it would be a transcript. You also send documentation to NCARB verifying that you have a credential that meets the requirements. In that case, the education component is satisfied with that documentation, and you can proceed to take the exam. And once again, the education can be satisfied throughout the process. Once you have those three components met, in this case, it's a little bit different. You obtain first an NCARB certificate, and then with that certificate, you can request a license in one of the jurisdictions that accepts this program and start practicing there. There's one last way of obtaining a license in the United States, which is slightly different. We have mutual recognition agreements with certain countries. And this actually works both ways. So if you're licensed in the United States through this agreement, you would be able to get licensed in the other country. If you're licensed in the other country, you can come to a US jurisdiction and obtain your license. We currently have agreements with Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the United Kingdom. And with this, it means that you have a license in the other country. If you meet the requirements of the different MRAs, which can differ, you are able to get an NCARB certificate here, and then with that NCARB certificate, obtain a license in one of the jurisdictions that accepts the program. So as if you were paying attention, I said a lot in one of the jurisdictions that accepts the program or specific additional requirements. By that, what I mean is 55 jurisdictions setting their own requirements. They may have slight additional requirements that could be anything from a registration form to California, going to an extreme, California that has the California supplemental exam, which is an examination you have to go through to be able to obtain their license. And to make it clear, on the slides you have, on the left-hand side, your the foreign educated path, and on the right-hand side, the foreign architect path. As you can see, most of the country accepts both programs. However, there's a handful of states on the left that do not accept the foreign educated path that are different from the ones on the right, which are the ones who don't accept the foreign architect path. So when you get started, the first step will be to determine where you want to go and find out what the requirements are. Here at NCARB's website, what you're seeing on the screen, you have the licensing requirements tool. So you go to our website, it's right there. And I would suggest clicking on the jurisdiction where you want to get licensed and reading about the requirements. That way you're sure that you are going the path that will maximize your opportunities. So now that was a lot, but let's start going through each of the programs. Starting with education. So I mentioned the NAB, the organization, they accredit the programs, and the programs that are accredited are Bachelor in Architecture, Master in Architecture, and Doctor in Architecture. All the other ones are not accredited. So this is important to keep in mind so you know where you stand. If it's a Master in Environmental Sciences or a Bachelor of Arts, that would not, it's great education, but it's not accredited, so you will need to find another pathway. I also mentioned EESA, the Education Evaluation Services for Architects. So I explained that you have to, they will identify if you have any deficiencies, and then you will have to satisfy them, have your evaluation updated. There is, of course, a cost for the EESA evaluation, but something to keep in mind is that there is an agreement, an accord, the Canberra Accord, that it's between the accrediting organizations of the different countries. And if your international education is from a program that has been accredited by one of the accrediting board that is part of this agreement, you are eligible for a 50% discount on the fee for the evaluation. So if you happen to be to have obtained a degree from one of them, please contact NCARB so we can apply the discount. Now diving into the Architectural Experience program, this is a framework for you to document your experience as you're gaining the competencies to become an architect. There are 6 experience areas in which you have to document your experience. The total amount of time is 3,740 hours. And each of the experience areas has a minimum amount of hours that you have to document while you are learning the tasks that are listed within that experience area. And the information, the detailed information about the tasks and what the experience area is about, it's in the AXP guidelines. Another thing to keep in mind is where can you work? So we have 2 experience settings, starting with experience setting A. Everyone has to document experience in this setting, and it's working for an architect license in the United States or Canada. So under direct supervision of an architect license in the US or Canada, in an architectural firm, so lawfully practicing architecture. That said, this architect that meets the requirements, or you, do not necessarily have to be sitting in the United States. we know by now, proven that we can work from anywhere, and you don't need to be like sitting right next to your supervisor for them to know what you're doing. So of course, NCARB and the AXP understands this. You have to document a minimum of about half the program this way, so 1,860 hours. Or you can go ahead and document your entire experience this way and fulfill the requirement. However, if for any reason, maybe your visa has a number of hours that you can work, some limitations that wouldn't allow you to document that many hours, the remaining 1,860, or maybe you just want to try something else, a different aspect of architecture. So you can document experience under experience setting O, the other categories. And in this case, I'm not going to go one by one, but I wanted to highlight some of the experiences that might be helpful. For instance, there is a large category, a large area, which would be the other licensed professionals at the top, that allows you to document the other half of the AXP, working for a licensed professional in landscape architecture, engineer, or architect not practicing architecture that is within the US. However, if you, for instance, have an internship in Paris and you are working for a French architect, you can document that experience under the experience setting O. So working for a foreign architect, you can document experience as well. Other non-paid opportunities would be volunteering for a community-based design center, which is a pre-approved organization. One of them is Freedom by Design. So if that's accessible to you, I strongly recommend that you take advantage of being able to document those experience hours. Design competition with an architect, being the licensed in the US or Canada, being the supervisor, or for instance, a site visit with a mentor with an architect licensed in the US or Canada, and walking you through a construction site. And you can also start adding up small amounts, so everything has a cap, but you can start adding up hours this way. I just went through it very quickly, but everything you need to know, it's in the AXP guidelines, so take a look. Now diving into the ARE, it's one national exam. You don't have to take it again, even if you want to get licensed in other places. It has 6 divisions, so one exam is split into 6 parts. If you were paying attention before, you can see that they align with the experience areas of AXP. And each of these parts, divisions, have a length and a number of items, questions that you will be asked. The type of items that you will encounter are multiple choice, check all that apply, and hotspots. Hotspots is where they give you an image and you have to point at something. Every exam will also have case studies. It's a real world scenario that they give you where you have the scenario, you read it, you have resources that you would have available in your office, and then you have questions about that case scenario. The exam itself can also be taken anywhere, so you can test in person within the US, or maybe if you're living or vacationing outside and you want to take an exam in London, you can go to a testing center there. Or you can take it online. If you have good internet, you can take it online, again, anywhere in the world. So you don't necessarily have to be sitting in the United States to complete the licensure process. There are many resources that NCARB has available. So check those out. We have an online community video series. And most important of all, well, you do have a practice exam, which is very helpful, where you can go through questions that are similar to what you would see at the testing center. And then the guidelines, it's a lengthy document, but it has everything you need to know to get started. And talking about getting started, the first step is starting your NCARB record. You will be asked, of course, for information about yourself, your education, and there is a fee. It's $100 to get started, and that covers the first year, and then the renewal is also $100. If you need more information about the different pathways for international experiences, let's say the different pathways, like foreign educated, foreign architect, MRAs, you can find it in this code, which is the International Applicants booklet that NCARB has. So what do you need to do? First, summarizing, of course, check out the right information. NCARB has a lot in their website, the newsletters. Make sure you know what the requirements are for the jurisdiction where you are seeking licensure so you can make decisions about your pathway. And of course, keep your record up to date so you can continue documenting and testing and get certified so you have the world, because as I mentioned with the MRAs, you can actually even go to Australia and New Zealand kind of to practice there. So get certified to maximize your opportunities. And last but not least, contact NCARB if you have any questions. So sorry that extended a little bit more, but I can get very passionate about this topic.
Thank you, Patricia. I think we're all very passionate about this topic as well. It was a very thorough presentation, so thank you for that. I know that there are so many nuances to getting licensed, and for me, when I was just starting to get acquainted with everything, there were so many components, culture shock, a bit of uncertainty, and of course, a lot of questions. So hopefully this presentation can help make that learning curve a little bit less steep for our audience here today. So talking about questions, let's move on to the Q&A portion of our meeting today. Remember, you can submit questions using the Q&A portion, the Q&A tool in our webinar. And yeah, let's go into that. Let's hear from our expert panelists. Our first question is, do you have any advice about gaining AXP experience in an architecture firm and working with your supervisor? Neshe, I think you may have a good insight into this question. What do you think?
So to start with, I think it's very important to know and embrace your workspace culture. All the institutions have their own way of doing internal professional development and mentoring. For me, it started with a very thorough connection with my job captain, my project manager, right? And these titles may vary. So mentorship expands beyond just your team at work. And I started with scheduling monthly check-ins to get more advice on how my supervisors went with their journey to gain their licenses, right? And throughout these check-ins, I would actually ask for certain experiences in different sections so I could actually have a more thorough documentation for my hours. You need to advocate for yourself when it comes to gaining experience in different areas, because starting off of school, obviously there is a learning curve. You may not be acclaimed using certain software, or you may be staffed to certain type of projects, and you cannot pick and choose, right? The job is to get it done and get it done in a meaningful way. So obviously, being so selective at the type of tasks that you are assigned does not come off professional or adaptable, but bearing in mind that you do want to get your license and you want to be fairly thorough with your intention is important. So speaking up and putting yourself out there, being a self-starter, initiating for different type of tasks. If your project scope is not touching to some of the things that you would document for construction evaluation, maybe when the time comes in 3 to 4 months, starting to ask for a little more experience in those areas is important. Also, practice management and project management are the areas that I believe are the hardest to kind of start getting some hours in, because you will not be managing a project right off of school, right? So, but there are some ways to kind of flex on that with the lunch and learns that your office has, with some professional development initiatives with AIA or NOMA or Arquitectos or any other institutions that you may be attending to, conferences, different emerging professional summits. These are the things that you can ask your advisors in your firm to look into. And if you're given professional development stipend to actually attend to these days, which you can go back and report what you took out of them to whoever is signing off on your EXP hours. I think that's a good way to start documenting some certain hours for those areas as well for your first year in school.
Perfect. Thank you, Neshe. I'm also interested in hearing from Graciela, a little bit more from the professional side for this same question. I'm going to repeat it. The question is, do you have any advice about gaining AXP experience in an architecture firm and working with your supervisor?
I think Nessie was super detailed on all the other options. I would just highlight, because not all the international students that we have in this country are, I would say, just students in the past in their own country. Sometimes where you coming from, you were working for an architectural firm probably, and you came here to do a master's degree, or maybe you were working there on other architectural engineering areas, and you wanted to advance your education here. There is always an option to have that education accepted here. It depends on when it was acquired. So that's something that you would have to check. In my case, even though I did all this process a long time ago, I got my license in 2013. I was able to report half of the hours that I needed from my experience in Colombia, which was signed off by a licensed architect in Colombia. So I think Patricia would know more about that in detail, but that's another option, that if you have experience in your own country and depending on where you're working there, you may be able to have those hours also reported here.
Perfect. Thank you, Graciela. Let's move on to the next question, which is for Patricia specifically, and I think it's somewhat related to what you were talking about. The question is, I have received an architecture degree internationally, and I'm not currently based in the US, but would like to become licensed there. What are my next steps towards licensure?
So I have so many questions, and that's the way it should be. So first, it depends on whether you only have education or if you have education and the license there. But based on the mentioning international education, first step would be to get an NCARB record open and start the evaluation of the education, assuming that they have completed it. And that is done through NCARB's records. So the first step still stands, which is getting your record open, and then adding all the information you have and requesting to open the ability to start the EESA evaluation, and that goes through our system.
Thank you, Patricia. I guess it's part of the nuances for international license, right? So always checking in with NCARB would be a good idea, and visiting all the resources that you have for international students and professionals in general. The next question is for Graciela specifically. What is the difference between a CV and a resume in the US?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because for us coming from other countries, we are used to, the 4 to even 10 pages CV, which is what it is, a very extensive document that shows all the experience and qualifications that you have as an architect. In the States is completely different. We use a resume. I tell everybody, ideally they say 1 to 2 pages. I advise everyone, have it condensed in 1 page. There is a lot of information that can be fitted in 1 page. We would need to see your education. You can arrange that on one side of the document, and then on the other side, you could arrange all your experience make sure that whatever you are describing in your experience, it's very, it is directed to the job position. So that's also a difference between the CV and the resume. The CV is just a Bible where everybody can see what you're capable of and what your experience is. Resume, you should technically have resumes depending on the positions that you are applying for, because you want to highlight whatever knowledge or experience you have regarding that specific position. You don't need a picture, a photo, a headshot. In other countries, that's also a requirement. In this country, is not. So feel free. Also, references, you don't need to list all the reference there. You can just say upon request. So you don't use space that is more important to use as your experience. So that's something that I see a lot from people coming from other countries. We're used to our CV. Please just switch to your resume. It's going to be much easier to have HR looking at it, and also design it nice, because we're architects, we're graphic people, and I've seen beautiful resumes that just get the attention of whoever is looking at them because it looks beautiful, some colors here and there. So take your time to look online. There are several websites online that you can download templates. You don't need to create these from scratch. You can download the templates even for free, and you have many, many options to put together your resume. And final advice, always have someone reviewing your resume. Get someone else that doesn't know your experience to make sure that they get the message that you're trying to convey in a resume. And that's how it's going to be powerful, because whoever is going to read your resume is not going to know anything about you. So you want that person to really know what you're good at. So get other people involved in the preparation of the resume. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Graciela. I think this is just great advice for everyone who's working on their CV and resume in general. So I was definitely taking note. Next up, we have a question for Patricia specifically. Is NCARB certification a mandatory component for getting licensed, or is it only required for reciprocity?
So you can, it depends on the pathway. In most cases, yes, you can get licensed without the NCARB certificate, because as you saw in some of the pathways, you first obtain your license and then you're eligible for reciprocity, for the NCARB certificate that will allow you to get reciprocity in the other countries. Sorry, not the other countries, the other states, as well as countries. However, there, for instance, the foreign architect path or the mutual recognition agreement, they both give you first the NCARB certificate, and you need that certificate to obtain a license.
All right, thank you. Next up, this question, I think we can start with Neshe and go from there. The question is, when should I start testing through the ARE?
Great question. This is a very personal one, right? It's also about how comfortable you feel taking the tests and within which limitations you're working towards. For international students, there are different visa requirements and deadlines, such as OPT, that we're working around. And you do need to find a job first and get your EXP hours straight, your record straight. And after that, in many states, you don't need to wait to complete your hours. You can just start taking the tests. And once you're done with all 6 tests, and if you're far ahead with your EXP hours, you don't have to worry much, right? It's majority of it is test taking and study strategy. I know some people who knock all 6 tests within the first 2 years upon their graduation. Some even start when they're in their last year of school. But it ties back to your own timeline. I know some people need to look into going back to school because they don't get an H-1B, so they need to extend their student visas. continue working full-time on their CPT, which is curricular practical training, and then do another 3 years of OPT. These are all about like your workload and how thin you're stretching yourself. But I would say don't make it a bigger obstacle than what it seems to be. I believe a lot of this is a mental endurance test. So as long as you ground yourself with a certain study strategy that works for you, where you can get your tasks done at your job and you keep escalating in the positions that you want to grow in, there's no need to wait, right? Like, you don't have to be super fluent in Revit to start taking the tests. It has nothing to do with it. For the ones who haven't really looked into the study material, take a look at it, use NCARB's resources, use whatever study materials that your firm is providing you with, and start with the one that you're most comfortable. You may have certain experience through your job in certain areas, but at the end of the day, you don't have to wait to gain one-on-one real life experience to start taking the tests, I would say.
I want to add something, Gilberto, and I love to see all of your advice because I totally agree with it, being that I was one of those H-1B visa holders back in the days. My advice would be wait till you get that visa, or at least some sort of permanent work permit, because you never know what's going to happen, with your immigration status. So why invest in so much time testing? Testing requires time and dedication and focusing on the exams. So make sure that you are completely established in any way with your work or with your immigrant status. When I was testing, I already had my H-1B, and by the time I got licensed, I think that's when I got my green card, so my permanent resident process. My point is that you may be able to do the testing while you have your work visa, or by H-1B or O-1 or another one. And that's going to add you to your case for your permanent status, which is the green card, because it's giving you more qualifications within this country as architects. So it's definitely something to consider if you plan to stay here permanently forever. So consider start doing the test and the process early, but I wouldn't advise to do it before you have your work permit established.
Thank you both for your very insightful responses. Like Nesha was saying, this is like a very personal process, and a lot of thoughts need to go into it. And talking about that, I think up next we have a couple of questions regarding EESA evaluations and education in general. So I'm going to give a little bit more context. One of them is getting licensed in California through the ACEI, which is the Academic Credentials Evaluation Institute, and 2 evaluations report after educational credentials. They want to know how their existing documents can help. And the other one has an international architectural education, but no US degree, and wants to know if they should start pursuing the EESA now or wait until they obtain a degree and then begin working on the EESA. Patricia, can you expand more on when EESA is relevant and how that process works?
Yes, so unfortunately, yes, there are many different evaluation companies. I know of a few myself for my visas. I've used different, but the only one that it's accepted is the one done by NAB. That would be the EESA evaluation services for architects. Because they are the only ones who compare the education that you have with the one that it's the NCARB education standard. All the other evaluations are done with different standards, and we are very specifically looking for certain criteria. So unfortunately, no, we'll help you in other things, but not in this one. And regarding the education, again, it's questions for you. If you are working on a degree from a NAV accredited program, so a bachelor or master's in architecture, I would say complete that process, complete that program, because it is the pathway that gives you the most reciprocity around the country. So with that pathway, which is the typical one in the slide, you can obtain reciprocity in all 55 jurisdictions. So I would say wait for that if it's the NAV accredited. In the other, even if it's not, completing it's better because that way they can see the whole picture instead of giving you a deficiency that you're actually taking that class next semester. Because there's a cost for the evaluation and any future re-evaluations. So complete the education and then have it evaluated. Oh, and regarding the EESA that you mentioned, that you asked before, my other recommendation would be start documenting your experience. Even if you're outside or inside the country, while you're still studying, start documenting experience, even while you're waiting for the evaluation to be completed.
Okay, thank you, Patricia. This one is a little bit more general. The question is there a maximum amount of years in which you have to complete this process? Or how long does it usually take licensure candidates to become licensed? I think we can start with Graciela on this one and then move on if you have any other comments.
Yeah, so to answer your question, it depends on where you're getting license, depending on the jurisdiction. But in general, there was in the past something called the rolling clock, which gave you 5 years to complete all the exams. And that rolling clock in the majority of the states, I cannot say all of them because there's always one that maybe is not accepting that yet. The rolling clock is now gone. So that means you can take 10 years doing your test. Would I advise you to do that? No. Go as quick as you can testing. There are people that they have complete all the exams in 1 year, in 6 months. That's totally doable. You just need to be very, dedicated to your study time and also be a good tester. And we are not all good testers. I'm not a good tester. So make sure that you just go through them because life happens. And then when you stop testing, it's very hard to start. And the reason why I say that is because I went through that. I stopped at one point in my life testing, and it took me a year and a half to go back to testing. And that's when the rolling clock existed. And because of the rolling clock, I pushed to get all my exams before the 5 years. But I wouldn't like people to be stressful that I need to, complete this in 1 year. Take your time if you need to, but also don't procrastinate because every time you stop, it's very difficult. Plus, you take the chance also that the tests change. It hasn't changed in many years, but if you're going to wait 10 years, I'm sure it's going to change throughout that time. So just get it done and make sure that you have a happy life too.
Thanks, Graciela. I wanted to ask Patricia actually, because you bring up a good point about the difference for the process for each jurisdiction. So do you have any insight on that?
Be informed because you don't want surprises after you have done the whole process. But yes, go check the licensing requirements tool on the website. It's interactive. You can choose your different options and find out exactly what type of documentation you'll have to present, what type, of course, making the decisions, knowing not only today what you need. So today, yes, I have, I live in Maryland and I want to get licensed here. That's awesome. But are you a person that plans to move around? So based on that, which path gives me the most reciprocity? So look at that map and see where you might end up. You never know. You might meet your partner at the other end of the country or life changes. So try to think ahead and maximize your opportunities because of the unknown.
Thank you. Another thing that I wanted to mention, that I'm hearing from our NCARB staff is that the only state that doesn't accept, is Illinois, and they're currently working on finalizing the rule removal. So, just something to keep in mind, right? I don't know if you want to say something else, Patricia?
I just wanted to be clear, they don't accept what the ESA or
I think it's talking about the 10-year period, right? The rolling clock situation.
uh, I would need to look into it, but it is possible, yes, that one state may not be there.
Thank you. I also wanted to hear from Neshe regarding this question. As someone who's going through the process, what do you recommend? How long does it usually take for licensure candidates? And what about the timing from your perspective?
Well, I just want to add on to what Graciela said. There's no need to like elongate the situation and because it's going to just drag. So to knock it out as soon as you can is the best way to go with it. But at the same time, be gentle on yourself. Do not yield to a burnout. Burnout is real. And the transition to the corporate life, or I'm not sure if everyone is like in the same path, but the work life after school is not so gentle. So make sure that you have your mental outlets. This can be having connections to people who are already over with that process. Information and a lot of knowledge is out there on internet, but what really matters is who you're getting that information from, right? When it comes to advice. So choose your mentors wisely and take it with a grain of salt and adjust that advice to whatever you're working around. I see this licensure process is like picking destinations to go upon what you said, Patricia. So if your license is a passport, you may not know where you want to go right now, but have some destinations that feed into that motivation, right? Like you don't have to have a 10-year blueprint of what you're going to do with this license, start your own firm, knock out certain projects, get prizes, but it gives you an opportunity pool, which you can just embrace the next phases of your life. Your 20s, your 30s, none of your ages will come back again. So just go through the process, but enjoy the time that you actually going through.
Hey, perfect. Well, thank you so much. Time has flown by. I know that it is a delight for me to hear from all of your experiences and insights. And so as we're reaching the last few minutes of today's webinars, before we wrap up, I wanted to ask each of you if you have any final takeaways or pieces of advice for our viewers. Neshe, why don't we start with you?
I think the last couple of things I said were already like advices. I will just echo them. Choose your battles wisely. If you're working with certain deadlines, as Graciela said, if you're trying to get an H-1B, if you're considering going back to grad school and continue working under certain student visas, thinking about the licensure process may be overwhelming, but it's good to get it out of the way as soon as you can. And you can use that license all around the world. I'm pretty sure there will be more countries that will consider counting your license towards their system in the following years. I think it's a pretty enhanced system. What NCARB has, the testing, a lot of information. So do not leave things to chances and what ifs. If you want to get licensed, and the immigration status will probably be resolved at the end of the day. So I would say do not treat your life as just like a checkbox of what ifs. If you want it, just do it.
Thank you. Now, Graciela, any advice that you'd like to share?
Yes, definitely. To change the topic from licensing, which we all want, I would also encourage you to improve your networking skills and definitely start going to events from organizations, start connecting with architects, because you need to make sure that when you graduate, you get that work visa or permit to work. But for that, you really need to open doors at different firms. If you can do internships, please, please, please start now. That's very important that you gain experience while you are in school. I get a lot of students, international, that when they graduate, they don't have that internship experience, and then they have a hard time getting a work offer. So please work on that too. And like I said, expand your network, join associations, go to events. But the most important part, ask questions and just connect with people. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Patricia, any takeaways from this session?
Yes, listen to Nessa and Graciela. They they provided great advice. For me, I would say make sure you're getting the right information so you can make your own decisions. Sometimes very experienced people around you will share their experience. However, they may have the wrong information regarding programs. I'm very specifically talking about programs because things are updated, like Graciela mentioned, and you want to have the right information. I do also want to mention one thing that I believe is extremely important for individuals who do not speak English as their original language, so non-native English speakers. I skipped it in my slides, but it's there is an accommodation for non-native English speakers that is called ESL, English as a Second Language, that you can request from your record, and it allows you additional time to take the exam because you have to think a little bit extra when you're translating. And also, if you're testing in person, you are allowed to use a word-to-word dictionary, so one language to the next. So make sure that you take advantage of any accommodations that you can and request them before you schedule your test.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm feeling all sorts of inspired and motivated after hearing from the three of you. And with that, this brings us to the end of our webinar today. Thank you to our three stellar panelists for sharing your expertise. And thank you, our viewers, for attending. If you couldn't see the entire webinar, you will be able to watch the recording later on AIAS's and NCARB's YouTube channels. We are so glad you were able to join us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.